Hey guys, Ryan Gill here with Hunt Primitive, and today we're going to work on learning how to back a bow with rawhide. Obviously this one is still in the building stage, but the rawhide is on, it's dry, it's ready to go. So we're going to make this as quick and painless as possible. We just want to get to the point on it. This is white-tailed deer rawhide, and you can get this at my site. We've started to get into selling supplies, and this is approximately about 3 inches wide, probably a little bit more, and I would say roughly 45 inches long. And it's just full length from one side to the other, long ways on a white-tail deer. And so the exact measurements are not something that I guarantee. It's pretty much I run the full distance on it. I give you the best piece I possibly can. Typically one rolled up piece like this is enough to do a bow that's about 6 to 8 inches from the end, because you don't need to always go straight to the tip right about here. Most time people are covering these with snake skins, but you don't have to. That would, that's up to you. But we go, 6 to 7 or even up to 8 inches away from the string grooves. And when we stretch a single piece like this, we can actually cover, because if you hold it up while it's dry, it won't make it the full distance. Actually, this one comes awfully close to it. But we're actually going to stretch this. That's why we leave it wider than, say, 2 inches. Because we're going to wet this and we're going to stretch it. Because if we stretch our rawhide, it will take some of the stretch out that happens during the tillering process. Rawhide has, in the past, been given kind of a bad name because it adds weight, but kind of gives the bow a little bit more sluggish of a feel, and that's not the case at all. This is what I use on our speed goat bows, and it's pre-stretched when I apply it, and we're going to show you how to do that, and we're actually getting some pretty quick bows out of it. So we're going to take a little metal pot, put it in here, and what I'm going to do is fill this with just warm water out of the tap. You don't want it super hot. If you end up putting really hot water in here, it'll end up curling and shrinking all up because you're essentially cooking the skin. So we don't want to do that. Fill this with warm tap water, and we're going to let it sit for, maybe an hour or two. I prefer, let it sit half hour, an hour, and then I pull it out and we'll stretch it, and then I'll roll it back to get up, and then I stick it back in here. And I'm not going to show you all of that, but we're going to fill it, and then I'm going to move on to using the draw knife and showing you how we clean it and how we apply it. But again, if you want this, I sell it by the strip. I think one strip typically always does a 66 to 68 inch bow, and obviously shorter. But I do recommend people, if they are a little bit worried about it reaching the length of the bow, buy 2 strips. Try to use one, and then if you run short, you split it at the handle, so you stretch one. That way you have enough for your project, but chances are you'll have one left over, and then you'll have something for next time. So save on shipping a little bit that way too. So anyway, let's put some water in here, and I'll see you back here in about 2 hours. Now we're going to pop this out, and it's relatively soft at this point, and I've just got a flat board. I'm just going to lay it on there, and I like to leave a couple inches between here and there because it does stretch. Then I've got a wood clamp, and I'm going to bring it out, clamp it right to the bench, and what I'm doing is I'm just sandwiching the rawhide in between the board and the clamp so it holds it in place. And then we've got our draw knife, and the idea is we're not trying to cut it, we're just using this to scrape. And this is the underside, so when it curls up, it curls this way, and you'll notice that you'll have a much smoother side, and this is the side that the hair was actually on, and then they scrape that off. And then this is the side that's got the membrane on the inside. So what we're doing is we're just scraping this, and you can do this, you don't have to have a draw knife, you can do it with a pocket knife, but realistically, if you're doing this and you're making bows, you probably own a draw knife anyway. So then I go ahead and you can see all the stuff that comes off in just a few scrapes. I throw that right in the garbage. And the idea is you want to get every bit of this off that will come off. So you're just scraping this membrane clean. And then what we're going to do is when it's all clean, we'll take it back. We're going to take a little bit of Dawn dish soap. I'm not even going to show you doing that because it's just not important. Take some Dawn dish soap in a bucket or in the sink, and we're just going to wash this. We're going to soak it a little bit more and try to get rid of any sort of natural oils that are in this skin. So go ahead, scrape it as clean as you can get it. Mix up some good Dawn dish soap. Wash it out really good. Let it soak for 10 or 15 more minutes. Wash it some more. Then rinse it several times to get that Dawn out of it. And then you'll have a skin that's really clean and it's ready to glue on, and then we'll actually work on stretching it after that as well. Alright, we're about ready to put our rawhide on. It's all washed and Dawn, and the important thing too is you don't want it sopping wet, so what I usually do is pull it out and I wring it a little bit, and then to further stretch it I lay aside on the ground. I stand on it and then I can pull it and stretch it until basically it slips out from under my foot. That's going to help stretch your rawhide out, which to me is very important, and it also helps wring some of the water out because you don't want it sopping wet because it will dilute your glue. And then what you'll also notice, and this is why I cut these strips, you know, roughly 3 or so inches wide, because after you stretch them, now all of a sudden they're much, much thinner. And in fact, some places you'll have to go and widen it back out as you come to maybe a thinner spot in the rawhide. And what you want to do is just, you don't want to completely stretch it back this way. You just want to open it up with your thumbs, because you'll notice the side you want to put the glue on is curled in. That's the side that we separated or scrape the membrane off. So now we're going to go across, open it back up, and then another little trick, if you have a side that's thicker than the other side, which often happens, more times than not it happens, you'll notice that, like say this side is thicker than this side, put the thicker side on the bottom limb, because typically if you have a limb that wants to fail, it's the bottom limb, so you're essentially adding weight and adding structural integrity to the bottom limb by using the thicker side. So decide what your thicker side is and align that when you lay this down to glue it, so you glue that on the bottom limb. Not super important, but it may help you with your tillering in the future, even though now I do need to go back and at least talk about this, that this bow, this is going to be one of my high planes models, and this stuff's really important. I know that it's probably going to drag the video out a little bit to talk about it, but it's really important stuff because I don't use rawhide as a band-aid. Rawhide can be used as a band-aid if you have violated rings or a knot that's cut over or a lifted splinter, who knows what all, but I build the bow to be the absolute best it can possibly be, and that is I still chase a ring to the best of my capability on every single bow, whether I rawhide back it or not. So this has a perfectly chased ring, and it's an absolutely beautiful straight piece of wood. And the reason that I'm adding the rawhide backing is it's going to give it stronger structural integrity, but also, like on my speed goat models and even a little bit on the high planes, is what we're able to do is actually shrink the length of the bow to allow it to be drawn further by rawhide backing it, because it adds strength to the back of the bow. But by having a perfectly chased ring and a piece of rawhide on this glued on, realistically, pending some odd flaw that we didn't see, the belly of this bow would fail long before the back does. And so that's why we're making the strongest bow out of this that we possibly can. So I'm not recommending that, hey, you just take any piece of wood, rake it down, don't even worry about a growth ring and do it. If you want to do that, that's fine. Do that at your own risk. But I still chase a ring. Now, that being said, I've got sandpaper that is 50 grit. I do believe it's pretty heavy stuff. And what I've already done is I've gone along this entire bow, and I have actual marks here, 5.5 inches, because that's what my 5.5 from the string groove is what I usually shoot for on my bows for stopping the rawhide. But I take this 50 grit and I want to sand off, and I've already done it so I don't have to sit here and do it all. Sand off every bit of the pithy wood that's left over after you've chased your ring. So you have some of those pithy wood remnants, and instead of going through and scratching them with a pocket knife, which is all well and good, but that actually leaves a smoother surface, I use 50 grit with the grain to remove every bit of that. And I sand the entire thing while I'm at it. Then, when I'm done doing that, in between these two lines, I go back and I'm almost like massaging circles into the back of the bow. And I want to make sure I touch everything. But what I'm doing is I'm creating little score lines that the glue is going to stick to so much better. And of course this one, like I said, is already done. But that's the idea. And I go all the way up and down it. And then it doesn't hurt my feelings to... I'm not going to do it here because I've already done it, because you have to let it dry for a little bit. Take a wet paper towel and really rub that dust off. Just a wet paper towel is all I recommend doing. Now, once that's all said and done, then I use Titebond 3, and the reason that I use this instead of hide glue is because this is obviously quite consumer friendly. So if you get this stuff wet, it's not going to delaminate right away. You got to really abuse it to get this stuff to delaminate. And I'm not looking for it to reflex on its own like you would a Western sinew backed bow. But we're going to do something else here in a minute. And the reason I'm showing you this first, and you can put the glue on first or later, whatever you want to do, but I like to kind of strike the wood a little bit, rub some glue in, and really spread the excess out. And what you want to do is, once you've got it spread on, go ahead and take some of the excess off. Got garbage can here, I'll wipe it off there. I really want you to massage the glue into the grain of the wood. And it's going to make a mess on the side. And that's not a big deal. It's not super important. So we're going to massage that in all the way up and down both limbs. And then, when that's done, keep in mind, while we're doing this, is we just took this out. So while it's laying here and it's upside down, we're actually trying to dry it slightly. Because, like I said, if it's sopping wet, it will dilute your glue and it won't stick very good. So get all the pithy wood off. I don't round the corners either on this. Like, I don't take a knife and scratch this down. I leave them perfectly square because it's going to give us the best glue union to the wood and rawhide that we can possibly get. So, like I said, what I'm doing, you'll notice it's like as the wood starts to absorb the moisture from the glue, it starts getting quite tacky. And you just want to pull off the excess. Either wipe it off on the bench or on the garbage can, but you'll feel when it gets tacky. And like right now, this part's really tacky. It's perfect. And then I'm going to let this dry for about 10 or 15 minutes, depending on how dry it is. You want it pretty dry, but not super dry, but you don't want it really wet either. So you want it to be able to be like, you can go like this and it doesn't really stick to your finger. And then, just so I don't have to show you that again, very lightly I take the sandpaper again once it's to that point and I scuff it just enough so the next glue layer sticks to it really well. So I'm going to give this about 10 or 15 minutes while this is drying at the same time. Let that go ahead and dry itself out and I'll catch up with you then. Alright, so here's one of the new fun parts. I didn't show you this just because I'd have to move the camera around, and we're trying to keep it really as short as we can. Is this bow is now braced backwards. You can hear the hum of the string, so it's under tension. So what I do is I actually have the bow tillered. Say if, for example, if we wanted this one to be X amount of pounds at say 28 inches, what I typically do is tiller to 26, maybe 27 inches, and I want a good nice tiller. Maybe we could perfect it later, but it's good tiller at 26, 27 inches. And then what I do, so now I know that the limbs already bend evenly, I brace this bow backwards. I don't change the string length at all. So we're braced one way, and I know that that's kind of a butt pucker moment for some folks, that you're going to take a bow that could very literally break along the belly because there's grain run out, and you're going to brace it backwards. Now, I do that, and I think that realistically what we're doing is we're forcing reflex into the limbs, and then we're going to apply a stretched rawhide, and you're going to see we're going to stretch it even more, and we're using the modern glue. So this way we actually still have some reflex that we are forcing into it, and that's one of the things that makes the rawhide actually give some performance benefits into this, not just a band-aid for keeping it from breaking or what have you. So if you want to run the risk of bracing your bow backwards, go for it. I do, but I am comfortable doing it. I know what I'm doing. I've done this many, many times over, and I've actually never broken a bow bracing it backwards. But I can't guarantee you that you're going to be able to brace the bow backwards and it not break. So do that at your own discretion. Now, this is already, it's quite tacky at this point. Like, I can touch it here and it doesn't really stick to my fingers except for like 1 or 2 little spots. So while we're letting that dry the tiny bit more, and then as soon as, and I guess I should preface it too, usually I brace it backwards and then I do the first coat of glue, but I kind of forgot to do that, so I had to brace it backwards and then re-glue that spot. Not terribly important. Take our glue, and our rawhide is at this point getting, it's certainly not dry, but it's not sopping wet. And we're going to just run a little bit of glue along the inside, the side that we scraped the membrane off, and it curls in. I'm going to rub some glue on there, and then basically massage it in just like we did on the bow. Even out to the edges, even if you don't think you're going to use that outside edge, because you'll be surprised when you start stretching this rawhide to put it on, how close some of these edges can actually get to being on your working limb. And you don't want any delamination, so glue the whole thing. You can make a mess on the side of the bow, because we can scrape and grind that off later. That's not a big deal. So I mean, you don't want to completely gob the glue, because we do have to squeegee it out a little bit later. But you want to make sure that every bit of this rawhide, it's massaged into it. So I mean, really work that stuff in there with your fingers. Don't just take it and go, okay, well I covered it and that's good enough, because it's not. I want you to work it, push hard, and really squish it down into the fibers, because that's going to be the difference between this delaminating down the road and holding tight for years and years to come. So I mean, really work that stuff in. If it takes you 15, 20, 30 minutes to do it, do it. Remember that I do everything a little bit faster than the average person, because I do this just about every day of the week. So not necessarily this, but I mean primitive stuff. Then that is sitting there. Let's go ahead and put one more strip right down, and then we're done with the glue. And I'm going to massage this into our already tacky but roughed up, hold on, let's tighten it, vice down a little bit more. A vice definitely helps, I'll tell you that much. That's one of the only things I use a vice for, is backing a bow. Go ahead and keep rubbing this in. Every little bit that you can possibly get, because anywhere that you don't have glue, let it drip on the floor. Make sure you're not doing it over your living room carpet or something like that. You can scrape this stuff up later. You can wipe it up. You can do whatever you want to do. It's not that big of a deal, but I wouldn't do it on your kitchen floor or your living room floor, that's for sure. Make a mess of it, but really get this stuff in here good. Now, if that's done, we're going to take our rawhide, and I'm going to show you here on this side. Usually I do it the other way, but, well, same way, make sure the camera's still pointing at me. Yeah, you think you can still see what I'm doing over here. I'm going to lay this down and put it just about to the mark. And it's okay if you get some on the back here too. That's not that big of a deal. It'll all dry. We're going to hit that with a little sandpaper later. Now, instead of just laying it completely flat, I want you to actually take it and squish it, kind of almost pull it this way along the tip, or the edge, not necessarily the tip, but the edge up here. And then I've got just cotton twine is all this is. Just a simple cotton, cheap cotton string. And I like to do this. There's lots of different ways people have done it with inner tubes and ace bandages and all that kind of stuff. I love this because I can use it, I can cut it off, I can throw it away. And I also like, you'll notice when you do this, when you wrap it with the string, it leaves these little grooves in your rawhide. And if you're not backing the bow, it gives it a really interesting pattern, and I like that. But I've gotten so accustomed to doing it this way that I wouldn't do it any other way. I absolutely love the string, and I spaced the string out what I would guess is about 3/8 of an inch. And they're all kind of at a little bit of an angle. But I take a little bit of time, I squish it down. You don't want to make sure that this rawhide doesn't fold up under, because then you're going to have to unwind it if you put a piece that's folded up under. Make sure as you go that it's all unfolded, and you're going to wrap about every 3/8 of an inch and keep these nice and tight. Now, before we do that, now I'm going to take a spring clamp. I put a couple wraps here. I'm going to clamp it right on the side. And the reason I wrapped it first was because if I spring clamp it and then I want to go wrap it, I got to take spring clamp off. So just wrap it while it's loose, spring clamp it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take the other side of this. This is the important part. Okay, we're going to stretch this thing, and this is where you're like, oh crap, I've got a lot more rawhide than I need. And this is where it starts getting thin. You're going to stretch it all the way across. A pretty good stretch. It all depends on how much. It's almost until it starts slipping. But it depends on how much it thins out your rawhide. And then I want you to spring clamp it over here on this side. Whoop! And we lost it. Hold on, let me redo that. It gets a little bit slippery for sure. So I'm going to pull it across pretty tight. It's going to start slipping either out of your fingers or out of that side over there. But you're going to get this thing as tight as you can get it, and then spring clamp it even if it's on the top or the bottom. Now, and you got to do this relatively quick because of the glue drying. And then you can't get completely under the vise, but you're going to go right to the middle and you're going to spring clamp that. Okay, see what we did right there? Now, what you can actually do is, realistically, because you want this glue to stay dry while you're wrapping, don't let it completely take tension off this side, but you spring clamp this side, at least to hold it. Then we'll go back and we'll redo this, but hold on. The idea for doing that is you want the glue to start binding itself, or it's actually keeping itself wet. It's not binding itself. You're just keeping it wet. And that's just something that I personally do. Now, again, we're moving quick on this because you don't want your glue to start drying out. So now we continue with the 3/8 inch windings, and this is where you really need to make sure, because if you've pulled this tight, you'll notice that these edges curl under. So you really need to spread them back out before you start wrapping, and you got to wrap them pretty tight. I mean, it's not so tight that you're breaking the string, but when I come around the top of these, it's tight, and when I come over, I'm really pulling it tight, and then I'll hold it with my thumb and wrap it around the other way. And it depends too on which way you're holding the spool. If you hold it this way, as you wrap, it actually gets looser off it. So I keep it to where the spool, as I wrap it, I'm actually sucking up the slack rather than letting slack out. And you'll know what I'm talking about as soon as you start doing this. Just spin the spool one way or the other and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So I don't have to go into too much explanation. If you ever need to stop, take a spring clamp. This one I don't need because I have one over here. It's good. You can put a spring clamp right on that and it's not going to go anywhere. So that string will hold pretty tight. So if you have to pause for any reason, just take another spring clamp and pop it right there. Alright, I just wanted to bring you up close to kind of see how we were working this. Remember, we're kind of squeezing it this way to flatten it out because you don't want a bunch of wrinkles in there, and then you can kind of see the distance, well, maybe a little bit. You can see the distance in which I'm wrapping this, but I'm keeping it pretty tight. And go ahead and just kind of work some of the bubbles out as you go, but you do have to do it relatively quick. Like, it's not, you better have it done in 2 minutes or it's over, but I would keep it in under 10 minutes because you're going to notice that glue starts drying out pretty darn fast. Now, if you do get to a point where you've done halfway and you think that your glue is starting to get a little bit dry, but that's why we left this other side down that you can't see right now. We left it down because it's kind of holding the moisture in because the rawhide's right down to the wood. And then when we're going to lift this spring clamp and we'll re-stretch that side, but if it does seem like it's getting a little bit tacky, just add just a tiny bit of fresh glue to liven it up a little bit. But we're almost done with this side. And then we can do the other side. And see, now there's a little problem right here. Probably can't hardly see it, but the skin is starting to favor this side. We need to walk this over, because remember, as rawhide dries, like any other sort of natural material, it's going to shrink, and that rawhide, that little edge, will shrink right up, and you'll have a gap. So make sure that it's spread out and over. And I'm going to give a gentle figure 8, and that's just to hold the stuff down in the middle, because remember, when we pull the other side, it wants to lift off here again. So just do a couple figure 8s, and then on this side I'm going to give about 1 or 2 turns right next to the vise, about as close as I can get it. 3 turns, we'll call it. I'll put a spring clamp on there. Boom, so that's done. We can let that go, and then we can let this side go, and that's not a big deal. Actually, our strings got a little bit loose. I could probably tighten them up. I'll tighten them up, and then we'll continue right from this point. Okay, so we got this tightened right back up. We got another spring clamp. Now, this stuff here, if I look at it, it's still pretty darn tacky. It's not too bad. I had a little bit of roll under here. Doesn't hurt. It's probably fine. What I'm going to do, because it sat here for that long, I mean a thin. You don't want to really gob it up, because you're going to squeeze it out. Just liven it up a little bit. Not too big of a deal. It would probably have been fine, but it doesn't hurt my feelings to just give it a little fresh coat. Just to give it a little bit of viscosity back into it. Now, we're going to pull that pretty darn tight. And now, give me a second. It's hard to do this and talk and everything at the same time. I'm going to squeeze it on the sides. Keep in mind where your line is. And then, take my scissors. Good sharp leather scissors helps. Cut it off. Get rid of the old stuff. And now we've got a nice new or stretched piece of rawhide here. And we're going to just do the same exact thing we just did, keeping up with the pace as much as we can, about 3/8 inches apart. We're just going to continue the wrap, and it's going to suck it down. And every once in a while, make sure you give it a squish. Make sure your sides are properly lapped over. So I can show you that, how that's kind of working all the way up and down. And now you can also take the centerpiece off, because it's no longer holding it in place. So our bow is strung backwards, completely wrapped with the twine, but we're not done yet. This is the part that's probably the most common for people to fail, and that is I need you to work out every tiny bit of air bubble and glue in this thing that you possibly can. I take from the center out. I'm not afraid to go past center at some point, but what I do is I take my finger and I use it as a roller, if that makes sense. So I put pressure down here, I push down, and then I roll, and I'm rolling all the air bubbles out. And I don't just pick up where I left off. I always go back a little bit and roll some more. And then there's other spots too where your finger gets sore. You can just use your thumb. And you'll see in some places I'll use my thumb like this. And that's really powerful. And then when your thumb does get worn out, I'll switch to my finger. So now that you can see what I'm doing, I'm going to bring the camera in close because I want you to see what comes out the other side. Could be glue, could be a mixture of everything, and we're working this out. And I mean, I'm abusing my finger really, really bad right now, but I'm used to doing this, so it does hurt. But you can't use something like, you can see, actually see air and glue both coming out. And we're just squeezing the excess out. And then we're going to take that and wipe it off on the garbage can. Done. We're going to come back in an hour, check it one more time, but realistically I'm going to let this dry overnight. Then I can take the spring clamps off, but I leave the string on, and then I set it up in the corner of the shop, and I have a dehumidified room that I let it actually cure out in, and I let it sit for about 2 weeks before I am ready to clean up the sides and then tiller. And we're going to skip that part for now. I just wanted to show you how to get it on, because when you take the string off, you just zip it off with a knife and throw it in the garbage because it's cheap string. Take a paring knife or something really sharp and you can trim these edges. And then you can also, if you have a belt sander, you can lay it right on the belt sander and actually just kind of grind those right off. And you're just going to grind them smooth around the edges ever so slightly with sandpaper. But give it 2 or 3 good weeks to dry. You want this stuff to be really cured out. You want make sure that there is no moisture. You can probably get away with it in a week in most places, but it's not going to hurt you to let it go for an extra week. Don't be in a rush. Just let it ride. And once it's dry, then you can go ahead and unbrace it. Now, in fact, when you're all said and done, the string that you put on that's tight here, it won't hum anymore when you do it. It'll be sloppy. You'll be able to pop it right off because it'll stay just like that. So there's your tutorial on rawhide backing. I know it ran longer than I thought it would, but I wanted to just give you the best information I possibly could. If you learned something from this, do please consider sharing it and please consider subscribing, because I try to give everybody all this information absolutely free because I just want people to enjoy the same journey that I do. And hopefully it makes you a better bow builder, better arrow maker, better flint knapper with all these videos that I do. So hopefully you subscribe and you keep following along, and we'll catch you on the next adventure.